It was, "Step aside. You look suspicious." It's strange how 4 words can strip a person bare in public. I had just stepped off a 13-hour flight from Johannesburg, tired to the bone, my legs aching from cramped seats, my mind still replaying the applause from the speech I gave at the Pan-African Economic Forum. I was looking forward to nothing more than my own bed in D.C. Instead, I was herded out of the line like contraband. The officer's badge read S. Harlan. His hair was cropped military short, his eyes cold and calculating, his lips curled just enough to let you know this wasn't about protocol. This was about power and about the fact that my skin was darker than his. He didn't even glance at the diplomatic tag on my suitcase or the gold lapel pin of the U.S. Senate I wore. He didn't need to. Men like Harlan don't see titles, they see targets. "Empty your pockets," he ordered, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Murmurs rippled down the line. A few phones were already raised. My jaw tightened, not because I had anything to hide, but because I'd been here before too many times to count. As he rifled through my belongings with gloved hands, I felt the sting of a memory. 15 years old, stopped outside a grocery store in Atlanta because I matched the description. The only thing I matched was a stereotype. That was the first time I learned that my success wouldn't shield me from suspicion. "Traveling alone?" he asked, even though my itinerary clearly listed my staff 3 aides who had gone through a different gate minutes earlier. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but clipped. "Purpose of your trip?" "Diplomatic," I replied. He smirked, flipping through my passport as if it were a cheap novel. "Funny, I don't see senator listed anywhere in here." That was the moment my patience started to crack. "You won't," I said evenly. "It's not a profession you list in a passport, but you could confirm it with your supervisor in about 30 seconds. Harlan didn't move. Instead, he motioned for a younger officer to bring over a sniffer dog. My suitcase was opened wider, my shirts pulled out, my neatly packed gifts for my nieces pawed through. The crowd behind me shifted uncomfortably, some glaring at Harlan, others pretending not to notice. Every second he delayed me, my phone buzzed with missed calls from my chief of staff, from the journalist who was supposed to interview me tonight, from my wife, who was waiting at arrivals. When the dog found nothing, Harlan leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You think your fancy suit means you're better than me. Here, you're just another passenger. And you're not leaving until I'm done." That's when I realized wanted me to react. He wanted the headline to be "Black Senator Resists Customs Search," not Customs Officer Harasses elected official. I took a slow breath. "Then you should be done now," I said, making sure my voice carried. "Unless you're detaining me without cause. In which case, I'll be happy to call my attorney and the head of Homeland Security. She's an old friend." Harlan's smirk faltered. Somewhere behind him, another Afikara woman with dark hair and tired eyes stepped forward. "Harlan, that's enough. I'll take it from here." But it wasn't over. Not for me. Not for him. Because this time, I wasn't just going to walk away and chalk it up to another day in America. This time, I was going to make sure the whole damn country saw exactly what happened under these bright fluorescent lights. The woman's badge read Lieutenant Rivera, and she had the kind of authority in her stance that comes from both experience and exhaustion. Her eyes flicked to me briefly, just enough to convey she understood this situation was a mess, and then back to Harlan. "You've made your point," she said quietly, though her tone left no room for debate. "I'll finalize his clearance." Harlan didn't budge. Protocol says reasonable suspicion," Rivera cut in. "You have none. Unless traveling while black is in the manual now, which I doubt." His jaw tightened. For a long, loaded second, I thought he might push it further. But then Rivera stepped in front of him, physically blocking his view of me. That small actor body as a shield was almost jarring in its humanity. I took my passport back from her and zipped up my bag. "Thank you, Lieutenant." My voice was polite, but it carried an undercurrent I couldn't hide. I was grateful, yes, but I also knew she'd just prevented Harlan from making a bigger fool of himself. I started toward the exit, but Harlan called out behind me. "Don't think this is over." Oh, I didn't. Outside, the air in the arrivals hall felt different, freer, but laced with the sour taste of what had just happened. My wife, Aisha, spotted me before I saw her. She was leaning against a pillar, scrolling through her phone, a look of mild irritation on her face. That irritation vanished the second she saw mine. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me into a hug that was half comfort, half inspection. "You look like you just went 12 rounds." "I did," I said, keeping my voice low. "With customs." Her brows shot up. "Again." "Again," I confirmed. This one was determined. She sighed, and it wasn't the sigh of someone surprised. It was the sigh of someone who'd seen this movie too many times, who knew the script by heart. "Names?" she asked. "Harlan. Badge number 2476. Aisha nodded grimly. "We'll add him to the list." We had a list, a private one we kept, of every official who'd crossed the line with me over the years. Some were small-time offenders. Others had been the spark for major investigations. The list wasn't about revenge. It was about patterns. As we walked toward the car, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "Senator, it's Kate," my chief of staff said without preamble. "We have a situation. Someone filmed the whole thing. It's already on Twitter." "How bad?" "Depends on your definition." The clips racked up 200,000 views in under an hour. Hashtags are trending. Customs while black. Senator stopped. Media's calling for a statement. I exhaled slowly. "Then we don't wait. Call a press conference for tomorrow morning. Capital steps. And Kate, find out everything you can about Officer S. Harlan. Service record, complaints, political affiliations, everything." That night, sleep was a luxury I didn't bother chasing. Instead, I sat in my study, laptop open, watching the video from every angle posted online. There I was, standing still, answering questions with clipped precision, while Harlan circled me like a wolf sizing up prey. The audio was crystal clear, every smirk in his voice, every unnecessary instruction. But what struck me most wasn't my own composure, it was the look on the faces of the people around us. Some were openly disgusted. Others filmed quietly, their expressions unreadable. And some looked almost relieved it wasn't them. That's the thing about public discrimination. You never just have a victim and a perpetrator. You have witnesses. And every witness walks away changed, whether they admit it or not. The press conference the next morning was a swarm of cameras, microphones, and shouted questions. I stood at the podium, the marble steps of the Capitol behind me, Aisha to my right, Kate to my left. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady, amplified by the crisp winter air. "Yesterday evening, upon returning from a diplomatic trip representing the United States abroad, I was stopped, searched, and harassed by a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer without cause. The only apparent reason was the color of my skin. The murmurs were immediate. I let them settle before continuing. This is not about me as a senator. This is about every black traveler who's been made to feel like a criminal in their own country. This is about systemic bias that hides behind the shield of protocol. And this is about accountability." I laid out the facts, then dropped the piece I knew would land hardest. This was not Officer Harlan's first complaint. We have obtained records showing at least 5 prior allegations of racial profiling, all dismissed without investigation. Gasps, pen scratching, camera shutters clicking in rapid bursts. "Therefore," I concluded, "I am calling for an independent review of CBP practices, and I will be introducing legislation to create a public database of complaints against federal officers." "Sunlight," I said, meeting the gaze of every reporter there, "is the best disinfectant." By the time I left the podium, my phone was blowing up again, but this time with messages of support. Colleagues from both parties, civil rights groups, ordinary citizens who had their own stories. But I also knew the pushback was coming. It always did. Sure enough, that evening, a statement from the CBP commissioner hit the news. "We take all allegations seriously. However, initial review indicates that the officer acted within standard procedures." Standard procedures. The phrase was so bloodless it might as well have been written by a machine. What they didn't know was that Lieutenant Rivera had already reached out to me privately. "I'm not supposed to do this," she said over the phone, her voice low. "But you need to know Harlan bragged about stopping you. Said it was about putting a senator in his place." My grip on the phone tightened. "Would you be willing to say that on the record?" There was a pause. "If it comes to it. But I've got 2 kids, Senator. You understand." I did, which is why I told her, "We'll make sure you're protected." The next week was a blur of interviews, committee meetings, and calls with advocacy groups. Each time I told the story, I could feel the weight of it shifting, not getting lighter, but being distributed among more shoulders. Harlan, for his part, went on administrative leave. CBP insisted it was routine during an inquiry. but I'd been in politics long enough to know they were scrambling. Then, 3 days later, Rivera called again. They're trying to bury it. Internal Affairs is calling it a misunderstanding. They want me to sign a statement saying you were uncooperative. I close my eyes. Don't sign. Whatever they offer, don't take it. We'll get you a lawyer if we have to. The breaking point came when a second video surfaced, one no one outside CBP was supposed to see. It was from the security camera directly over Harlan's checkpoint. The angle was perfect, the audio unmistakable. Harlan, what's the matter, Senator? Not used to being treated like the rest of your kind. Rivera's voice, off camera. Cut it out, Harlan. That was it. The final nail. When that clip hit the airwaves, there was no more talk of misunderstandings. Public outrage exploded. The same officials who had been slow to return my calls were suddenly eager to be seen taking a stand. And yet, as satisfying as it was to watch Harlan's downfall accelerate, I couldn't shake the deeper truth. Removing one man wouldn't fix the system that had made him possible. That's when I made the call to Aisha. I'm going to do it, I said. She didn't ask what. She knew. It's going to be ugly. I know, but it's necessary. We started drafting the bill that night, one that would require independent civilian oversight for all CBP misconduct cases, mandate body cameras for every officer, and make disciplinary records public. It was ambitious. It would face resistance. But I also knew that sometimes the only way to make them listen is to make enough noise they can't ignore you. And that noise was just beginning. The draft bill was barely 48 hours old when the first cracks appeared in the walls around me. It started with whispers in the Senate corridors, colleagues leaning against door frames, lowering their voices when I passed. They weren't subtle. After 12 years in politics, you learn to read body language the way a sailor reads wind shifts. These whispers weren't about whether they supported my bill. They were about how dangerous it was for them to be seen supporting it. By the end of the week, I'd gotten a polite but firm phone call from Senator Blake, a Republican from Texas with whom I'd once co-sponsored a Veterans Benefits Act. Marcus, he said, his voice laced with the kind of friendliness that meant bad news was coming. I've got to be honest with you. You're making a lot of folks nervous with this oversight thing. Nervous about what? I asked. Accountability? Transparency? Or the fact that it might actually work? He chuckled, the way you do when you're pretending you didn't just get hit in the jaw. Look, you know I'm no fan of bad policing. But this bill, you're going after CBP, DHS. You're picking a fight with people who have deep pockets and longer memories than either of us. They'll dig until they find something to hang you with. Let them dig, I said. I'm not afraid of sunlight. What I didn't say because I didn't need towers that I knew they wouldn't stop with me. They'd go after Aisha, my staff, anyone they thought could be leveraged. Sure enough, the next move came fast. On a Thursday morning, the Washington Chronicle ran an anonymous source piece alleging I'd abused diplomatic privileges during my Johannesburg trip, private dinners, questionable hotel upgrades, and the ever-vague luxury expenditures. It was the kind of article designed to smell like scandal without actually proving anything. Every charge was either grossly distorted or outright false. But perception is a hungry animal. Once it gets a whiff of blood, it doesn't stop. Kate stormed into my office holding the paper. They're playing dirty, Marcus. And we both know where this came from. Harlan's friends, I said. She nodded. And they're counting on you to flinch. That night, Aisha and I sat on the back porch, the city skyline glowing in the distance. She poured 2 glasses of Bourbon brand of liquid honesty. They're going to keep coming, she said. I know. She studied me over the rim of her glass. And you're still going to push the bill? Yes. Good, she said simply. It wasn't approval so much as acknowledgement. The kind of steadying presence only a partner who's been through hell with you can offer. The next week, we brought the bill to the Judiciary Committee. The hearing room was packed, reporters, advocates, lobbyists. Harlan wasn't there in person, but I could feel his shadow in the smirks of a few committee members who'd clearly been lobbied hard to kill this thing before it reached the floor. I laid out the provisions clearly, point by point, making sure each one was backed with hard data, patterns of racial profiling, lack of disciplinary action, repeated incidents of abuse. Then I closed my remarks with the video clip. The footage of Harlan's comment, not used to being treated like the rest of your kind, played on the screen, echoing through the chamber. Gasps, shifts in posture, a few muttered curses from the back row. When the lights came back up, I didn't speak. I just let the silence stretch until it was heavy enough to make them squirm. Finally, Senator Albright, the committee chair, cleared his throat. Thank you, Senator Carter. We'll take your bill under consideration. Which was DC code for we're going to bury it if we can. 2 days later, Lieutenant Rivera called again. They're putting me on administrative review, she said. They've pulled me off the floor. No explanation. They're retaliating, I said. Of course they are, she replied flatly. But I thought you should know theory digging into your travel records too. Not just Johannesburg. Everywhere. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about Harlan anymore. This was about a network, a culture that protected its own by crushing anyone who challenged it. The breaking point came during a closed-door meeting with DHS officials. They offered me a deal, watered down the bill, stripped the public database provision, and they'd back it. No, I said. The undersecretary leaned forward, smiling without warmth. Then you won't just lose this bill, Senator. You'll lose your seat. I held his gaze. If keeping my seat means selling out the people I represent, you can have it. The night before the final committee vote, my office was broken into. Nothing of value taken, at least nothing obvious. But my desk drawers were rifled through, files scattered. It was a message, and it was loud. Kate wanted to call the police. I told her not to bother. We both knew how that report would end up. Instead, I doubled down. The morning of the vote, I arrived early and distributed packets to every committee member. Inside was a dossier of documented cases of CBP misconduct, including Rivera's testimony, all cross-referenced and verified. The last page was a single line in bold. If you vote against this bill, you are voting to keep this system exactly as it is. The vote was razor thin, but we won by one vote. The bill would go to the full Senate. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt the tide turn. As I left the chamber, my phone buzzed. A text from Rivera. Saw the news. I'll sleep a little better tonight. Thank you. I typed back. We're not done yet, but we're getting there. That night, I stood in front of my study window, watching the lights of the Capitol dome. Somewhere inside that building, deals were being made to kill my bill. But somewhere else on streets, in airports, in homes, people were watching too. And this time, they weren't looking away. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.